1995, Maurizio Gucci, Adam driver, finishes a meal and begins to ride his bike back home. We hear the voice of his wife Patrizia Reggiani, Lady Gaga, as she mentions how seductive the Gucci name was for her, and how it was also something of a curse. As Maurizio arrives home, a man is heard calling his name. Jump back to the 70s where Patrizia was working for her family's trucking business as a secretary, forging signatures on checks. She is later invited to a party by her friend Max, Moro La Mancha, which is where she meets Maurizio, as he is standing behind the bar. After learning he is part of the Gucci family, Patrizia immediately becomes interested. They hit it off and dance together. Later on, Patrizia stalks Maurizio as he goes to the library. He sees and recognizes her. Maurizio says he wants to become a lawyer. They talk for a bit until Patrizia convinces Maurizio to take her out on a date. Once he calls her back, they spend a day in town, sharing food before going to the lake on a boat. They are watched by a man named Franco, Gaetano Bruno. Maurizio invites Patrizia to meet his father, Rodolfo, Jeremy Irons. They have lunch together, where Rodolfo appears to look down on Patrizia's work in her family's business. The subject changes to Rodolfo saying he used to be an actor, which is how he met Maurizio's mother. Rodolfo later tells Maurizio that he doesn't trust Patrizia, seeing her as just another social climber who wants his money. It was Rodolfo who hired Franco to follow them, which is how he learned more about Patrizia's background. Despite all this, Maurizio defends Patrizia and tells his father that he loves her. Maurizio shows up at the Reggiani house to speak to Patrizia's parents. He informs them that he has decided to leave his family and money behind in order to make an honest living working for their business until he can marry Patrizia. Maurizio begins working at the company and genuinely enjoys the labor. At one point, he and Patrizia have sex in her father's office. The two are later married, and the news is caught by Maurizio's uncle Aldo, Al Pacino. Aldo visits Rodolfo about expanding the Gucci brand into malls, but Rodolfo refuses. Aldo brings up Maurizio and Patrizia's marriage, with Rodolfo feeling he and his son are done, but Aldo tells him that he will end up old and lonely if he doesn't make up with him. Aldo later contacts Maurizio and Patrizia to invite them to his 70th birthday party. Maurizio isn't fully on board, but Patrizia and Aldo convince him otherwise. Maurizio and Patrizia visit Aldo's home, which has many guests, including Aldo's bumbling son Paolo, Jared Leto, who also has his own ambitions of joining his family as a designer in his own right. However, Aldo discourages him from doing that, which leads to him and Paolo arguing. On their way home, Patrizia shows Maurizio 2 tickets to New York that Aldo gave them so that they can travel there with him. At night, Patrizia watches a commercial for a psychic woman named Giuseppina Pina Orima, Salma Hayek. Patrizia calls her and asks her if she will be successful, which Pina says is vague, but she quickly acknowledges that Patrizia has ambitions for success in all fields of her life, and Pina suggests that Patrizia will get everything she wants. Maurizio and Patrizia attend Aldo's birthday party, where he once again tries to convince them to go to New York with him. Patrizia talks it over with Maurizio, telling him that he has an opportunity to bring something more to the family. She also announces to him that she is pregnant. Maurizio agrees to go to New York. The couple moves into a lavish new apartment with a great view of the city. They begin to work with Aldo to expand the Gucci brand. Back in Italy, Paolo brings Rodolfo over to show him some of his design ideas. Rodolfo says to not show them to anyone, which Paolo thinks means that he doesn't want anyone to steal his ideas, but Rodolfo makes it apparent that Paolo is too incompetent and mediocre to make a mark in their business. When Rodolfo leaves, Paolo vows to get his designs out on his own, and he grabs a piece of cloth that Rodolfo designed so he can piss on it. Patrizia gives birth to her and Maurizio's daughter Alessandra, named after his mother. They later return home to meet with an ailing Rodolfo to share the news with him. Rodolfo is proud and tells Maurizio that the Gucci business is in his hands now. Not long after, Rodolfo passes away, and the family attends his funeral. Patrizia and Maurizio meet with the family's business associate Domenico de Sole, Jack Huston, who informs Maurizio that Rodolfo never signed his death certificate, and if he wants any claim to whatever Rodolfo left him, Maurizio would either have to pay an inheritance tax of $14 billion or sell his shares of Gucci. Patrizia tells Maurizio she doesn't trust Domenico. Patrizia meets with Pina in person, where she gives Patrizia other personal advice to maintain control of her stake in the family business. Aldo gives Maurizio a job at one of his stores. Patrizia later finds that their housekeeper got a knockoff Gucci bag from a flea market. She buys a bunch of them and shows them to Maurizio, who doesn't seem entirely fazed by people producing fakes, and Patrizia calls him a cretin for it, which he does not approve of. They bring Aldo in, and considers the fakes to be profitable. Patrizia argues that this would ruin the credibility of the Gucci name, but Aldo dismisses her opinion because this is not a girl's game. Milan, 1983, at a Versace fashion show, Maurizio meets a designer named Walter, Edward Filippinat. They exchange pleasantries, but Walter says that the Gucci name has gone down. Patrizia overhears this and later chastises Maurizio for not living up to his potential. She says they need to cut Aldo and Paolo out of the business if they want to make any progress. Domenico informs Patrizia and Maurizio that Paolo is attempting to start his own fashion line. She tells Maurizio that they should appeal to Paolo in some way to prevent him from going against their own business. Patrizia later meets with Paolo on her own to manipulate him by appealing to his ego. She convinces him to let her and Maurizio distribute his designs under Gucci for a deal. Aldo is later arrested for tax evasion and sentenced to a year in prison, which worries Paolo about any potential legal trouble he may face. During a fashion show that Paolo puts on, he is hit with a cease and desist, and officials come in to seize his assets and force the show to stop and the guests to leave, with Paolo's wife Jenny, Florence Andrews, being left humiliated as she continues singing by herself on stage. Paolo confronts Patrizia and Maurizio, accusing them of acting against him. After an argument, Patrizia tells Paolo that she and Maurizio want to buy Paolo's shares of Gucci. Later on, Maurizio flees on a motorcycle when he learns that officers are seizing assets in his and Patrizia's home, but she arrives to witness this and is distraught, believing that Paolo is behind this move. Maurizio crosses the Italian border and ends up at a ski resort where he runs into an old friend, Paola Franchi, Camille Coton. Patrizia eventually brings Alessandra up to meet with Maurizio, where Patrizia meets Paola and her friends. While having lunch with them, Patrizia is unhappy with the way Maurizio talks about her in front of the other people. They argue in their room later because Maurizio thinks that Patrizia is manipulating him against his family and doesn't seem to trust anyone. Patrizia tells him he is a cowardly man. Patrizia stays with Maurizio over Christmas so they can be with Alessandra. While Patrizia gets Maurizio a nice gift, he just gets her a gift card to Bloomingdale's. She later talks to Paola and appears to press her for personal information. At night, it is evident that Maurizio has totally fallen out of love with Patrizia, and she tells her that he is sending her and Alessandra back to Milan. Maurizio begins an affair with Paola and meets with investor Numar Kirdar, Yusuf Kirkour, to help him out with the business. Aldo is later released from prison and reunites with Paolo, who informs him that he sold his own shares of Gucci, enraging Aldo. Paolo justifies this because he is basically broke, but Aldo feels he is now ruined. The two later meet with Numar to make a deal for Aldo to sell his shares, but after they learn that Maurizio is involved with Numar, Aldo calls Maurizio a traitor. Aldo briefly weeps but signs the contract anyway. Domenico later finds Patrizia and informs her that Maurizio intends to divorce her and wants shared custody of Alessandra. Patrizia talks to Pina again, and more or less figures out that Maurizio is with another woman. Maurizio starts to take Gucci back up to the top, meeting with other top designers like Anna Wintour, Catherine Walker, when trying to find new partners. Domenico introduces Maurizio to Tom Ford, Reeve Carney, who vows to help Maurizio. Patrizia finds him and tearfully tries to get him to go back to her, but he is done with her and Alessandra. She later begins sending threatening voicemails to him and Paola. Patrizia and Pina meet with two hired hitmen, Ivano Savioni, Andrea Piedimoni Bodini, and Benedetto Ceraiolo, Vincenzo Tannisi. They give them the job to find Maurizio and kill him. Following a successful fashion show, Maurizio has dinner with Domenico, Tom, Numar, and other investors. They want to buy Maurizio's shares of Gucci for $150 million, which would give Domenico a more controlling stake in the company. Maurizio realizes Patrizia was right about him, and he throws his dinner plate on the floor. On the morning of March 27, 1995, Maurizio finishes his lunch and rides his bike home, where Ivano and Benedetto are waiting for him. Once they spot him, Benedetto exits the car and approaches Maurizio, calling his name and shooting him 3 times before fleeing the scene. Patrizia awaits the news and writes paradise in her journal. She goes with Alessandra to Maurizio's home to a devastated Paola to console her, and then callously tell her to leave her home. 2 years later, we see Patrizia, Pina, Ivano, and Benedetto on trial. The judge continuously calls Patrizia Signora Reggiani, but she tells him, "You may call me Signora Gucci." The ending text states that the 4 were arrested and convicted for Maurizio's murder. Patrizia was sentenced to 29 years in prison, but was released after 18, Pina got 25 years, Ivano with 26, and Benedetto received a life sentence. Aldo died of prostate cancer in 1990 while Paolo died in poverty in London 5 years later. The same year that Maurizio is murdered, the Gucci company became a publicly listed company, with Domenico and Tom leading the company in the 90s, and Alessandro, Michele and Marco Bizzarri running it today. It is one of the most successful brands, with an estimated net worth of $60 billion. However, nobody in the Gucci family currently works for Gucci.